Okay, I think I'm going to do the intro. Welcome, everyone, because Anne is having problems with her internet just at this moment. Welcome to today's Digital Academy webinar. We are delighted to welcome Brooke Schlesinger from YouGov Australia to give this talk. Brooke is an Associate Director at YouGov in Sydney, specialising in qualitative and quantitative research at the intersection of culture, politics and society. With over a decade of experience, she has led studies on social issues, political sentiment and cultural trends, helping clients understand what people think and why. So a bit about this webinar today. AI chatbots have moved further into everyday life as tools for productivity and information, and as social and emotional actors embedded within people's routines. As these technologies become more culturally present, YouGov wanted to better understand how Australians are negotiating this shift. Brooke will be talking through their work exploring AI companionship. As usual, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so please use the chat box as we go through if you do have questions, and then either turn on your webcam or raise your hand if you would like to speak. If you prefer, we will read out your questions and comments on your behalf. So I'm just going to let someone in. Over to Brooke now.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just pull up the slides for today. All right, I've lost you, but if someone can just tell me if you can see my slides well, that would be
all
great.
is good. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, okay. All right, so you gave a great introduction, so I'm not going to talk more about myself, except just say that my research that you'll see today focuses on the Australian population, but I'll be bringing in some insights from around the world at the end so that we can see and compare how some of the insights we saw with Australia might mirror what we're seeing on the global stage. And I think importantly, just wanted to start this by talking about the genesis of this study. Always helpful to know where these ideas, I think, come from. And this study from YouGov was one that was done by ourselves. We did not have a commissioning body beyond ourselves to do this. So really it was our idea and our genesis and desire to really start tracking and measuring chatbot use in personal and more intimate ways over time. For me, this study or the inspiration for this study really started about 12 years before we did our first wave, when I saw a movie you might remember called Her. In 2013, I remember exactly where I was, where I saw it. And for me, it really got me started thinking about the intersection of something so artificial, like software and technology, with something so innate to the human experience, like love. And I've been thinking about this thread ever since. But especially more so, as probably many of you have in recent years, when we've seen stories emerge about that growing influence and place of AI chatbots in people's lives. That really, to me, signified a need from a research perspective to start tracking what was happening. And so YouGov Australia embarked on a first wave of this study in September of last year, where we surveyed about 1,000 Australian adults. And then we followed up with a survey, which I'll talk a bit more about in a sec, in May of this year. The reason for doing this, or what we were looking to pinpoint and explore, was to really be able to go beyond the headlines and investigate at scale both the challenges of modern human relationships, but the growing appeal of AI companionship in that context, and trying to understand what's happening in terms of the impacts at large, and what might be more just salacious for media purposes rather than based in reality. All of the findings that you're seeing today from our YouGov study have been weighted and are representative of all Australian adults over 18. And this was done through a short survey for both waves. For wave two, which you are seeing new data from today, the reason why we wanted to follow up was even though not a full year has passed, we thought that 8 months was such a emerging technology, and as more and more stories and instances of AI's growing role in our personal or social lives emerged, we wanted to go back in market and really understand if anything has shifted, but also we introduced some new questions that got at not just the incidence of using AI chatbots for social and emotional reasons, but looking at exactly how, what type of conversations really are manifesting and taking hold, and with whom. So let's get into it. First and foremost, I think it's important to ground ourselves in the social landscape before we get into AI. So loneliness, isolation, I'm sure you've seen a lot of those emerge in your work. And we actually found that in the last wave that we conducted, loneliness was down across every generation. That doesn't mean that it's still not, important and significant for those affected by it. The share of Australians who said in this last wave that they often feel lonely or isolated, even around others, we did find that that decreased a bit from 39% in the previous wave to 29% in recent months. This drop was actually consistent across every generation and most pronounced among the younger cohorts. So with Gen Z falling, millennials, Gen X a bit as well. Despite the improvement, a generational gap remains clear in who is often lonely or isolated, at least in the Australian population that we surveyed, with Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X still having much higher levels of loneliness than baby boomers. So you can see here in terms of when we asked how much they agree or disagree with the statement, I often feel lonely or isolated even when I'm around other people. For Gen Z, those that agreed 36%, millennials 30%, and Gen X was at 31%. In terms of looking at who is often lonely or isolated, we also found that relationship status matters, as you might expect. Married Australians were significantly less likely to report frequent loneliness than those who are unmarried. I'm sure you're also wondering what might cause the decrease in loneliness that we found. And unfortunately, we didn't do a driver's analysis there that would allow us to better understand. I also think continuous tracking of such a measure would be really important to understand if this is a real decrease or perhaps just normal surveying differentiation. But I will say it could also be seasonality. It could be real, in fact, and it could also be that people don't categorize the same feeling as lonely at this time. Now, getting into the rates of interacting with chatbots for emotional or social reasons. We found that the percentage who have opened up or been emotionally vulnerable with a chatbot, it's around 1 in 4 Australians have opened up or been emotionally vulnerable with a chatbot. This is somewhat similar than what we saw in the previous wave. This suggests that this behavior hasn't meaningfully expanded to new audiences since then. So those that were engaging with chatbots for these more emotional, vulnerable conversations, it's similar proportion of the population than we saw last year. And interestingly, we also asked about something that might get at substitution. So one of the statements that we tested was, sometimes I would rather stay at home and talk to a chatbot than go out with friends. Here we saw really interesting data emerge. 1 in 7 say they'd sometimes rather stay home and talk to a chatbot than go out with friends. That's of all Australians. And Gen Z and millennials are the most likely to prefer or say that they sometimes would prefer interacting with a chatbot over a night out, socializing with their friends. As you can see in the chart, nearly 1 in 4 in both the groups, millennials and Gen Z, said that sometimes they would rather stay home and talk to a chatbot than go out with friends. I also wanted to highlight, not on this slide, but with this particular measure, that another population who is more likely to open up emotionally to chatbots is those who are lonely. So when we transposed the loneliness data from earlier in the survey to this question, we saw that about 35% of Australians who said they were often lonely or isolated also said that they've opened up or been emotionally vulnerable to a chatbot. If you compare that to people that were non-lonely, it's a stark difference. Only 18% of non-lonely respondents said the same. And as we found in our first wave, we saw again in this latest wave that a loneliness link does persist here too, in preferring sometimes to stay home and talk to a chatbot than go out with friends. Australians who often feel lonely are twice as likely to say that they'd sometimes choose conversing with a chatbot over socializing with friends. 21% of those who are often lonely or isolated agreed with this statement, and 10%, only 10% among those who aren't often lonely or isolated say the same. So not only are lonely Australians engaging with chatbots at a higher rate for these social or vulnerable revelations and conversations, but there also is indications here that for this population, there is some substitution risk in terms of choosing or at least desiring sometimes to forgo human interaction for that with chatbots. So the last wave, we looked at rates of using chatbots in these ways, but we wanted to this wave really unearth or understand exactly how or what types of conversations people are having with their chatbots outside of work. And we found that overall, Australians are using chatbots, or a significant portion are using them for chatbots in deeply personal ways, but few are labeling this relationship or interaction over time as friendship or romance. Digging in more this wave to how people are interacting with AI chatbots, we found that more than 1 in 7 shared personal thoughts or feelings with a chatbot. About 1 in 9 shared something they haven't told anyone else. A similar number have turned to a chatbot for emotional support during a difficult time. And about 1 in 13 actually did feel like they had a friendship with a chatbot, which is still obviously a minority, but important to know that at least for 8% of the population, there is that conception of that relationship as a friendship. 28% of Australians, when we tallied up people that had used chatbots at least in one of the ways listed, 28% of Australians came out as using a chatbot in at least one personal way. We did ask about sexual or intimate conversations, which we found do remain rare, at least in the self-reported data. We found that about 3% of all Australian adults said that they've had a sexual or intimate conversation with an AI chatbot. And interestingly, in terms of looking at these measures just on this slide, we did not see here much of a difference of the lonely and non-lonely Australian population. Though we did see with one of the measures listed that non-lonely people are significantly more likely to report not engaging in any personal or emotional use of AI when you tally up those that have said they've used them in any way versus those that said they have never used AI in any of these ways. However, while there might not be a link within those measures specifically, with loneliness, we did again find a big link or correlation with age. So we found here that age is shaping how Australians engage and relate to AI chatbots, at least in these ways, with younger adults showing the highest rates of engaging with chatbots in personal and intimate ways. So when you look at Gen Z, we see that nearly a quarter have shared personal thoughts or feelings with an AI chatbot. Around 19% have shared something with an AI chatbot they had not told anyone else. 22% have used an AI chatbot for emotional support during a difficult time. Similar numbers for millennials, though I will say that they were a bit higher in sharing personal thoughts or feelings with an AI chatbot. And as you can see, the rates for each really decrease as you go to older generations. So there are some signs here when we look overall at the data of a meaningful portion of at least young adults in Australia expressing some form of vulnerability with AI chatbots. Okay, so you may be wondering, can we learn more? Or I came here to learn about bot love, and this next slide's for you. So we asked if they could imagine themselves feeling romantically attached to an AI chatbot, and this was something that was asked in both waves. And perhaps, I guess, off the heels of that pattern of expressed vulnerability that we saw young adults had in their conversations with the AI chatbots, we see that young people or young Australians are more likely to see themselves falling for AI chatbots. Looking at the population at large here in Australia, we see that 1 in 12 of all Australians say that they could imagine themselves falling romantically attached or feeling romantically attached to an AI chatbot. This isn't significantly different from what we saw last year. But again, younger generations continue to be far more open to the idea of falling for a chatbot romantically. Over 1 in 6 Gen Z adults said that they can imagine themselves feeling romantically attached to an AI chatbot, and nearly 1 in 8 millennials felt the same. And staying on the theme of love for a moment, we also are seeing in our data some hints that AI might not just be an object of affection for some, especially young adults, but it may also be an object that is affecting our human to human romantic relationships. One of the questions that we asked in our last survey was, has AI chatbot use ever been a source of tension or disagreement in one of your romantic relationships? What we found is overall the proportion is quite small. So just 1 in 19 adults said that AI chatbot use had been a source of tension in a romantic relationship. But as you can see with the generational data, I think these figures are worth watching as younger generations age into longer term partnerships. When we looked at Gen Z and millennials, those in relationships and those not, we found that around 1 in 10 of all Gen Z and millennials say that chatbot use has already caused tension or disagreement in one of their romantic relationships. Now, it is important to paint a full picture, so I want to be clear that some Australians did say there are some positive impacts of AI on their romantic relationships. Nearly 2 in 10 Australians said that using AI chatbots has made them better at communicating or connecting with the people in their lives. Younger adults were especially more likely to feel this way. So 3 in 10 Gen Z and more than 1 in 3 millennials, so 5 percentage points more, say that chatbots have improved actually how they connect with other humans. But if you look at the older generations, that is substantially lower who say the same. Interestingly, married Australians are more likely than non-married Australians to agree that chatbot use has made them better at communicating with the people in their lives. 23% of married Australians said this versus 14% of unmarried, which suggests that some people in serious committed relationships maybe or are turning to AI to help navigate them. So we also asked about the equivalence or difference between AI and human to human relationships in the value that they offer people in their lives. And interestingly, we found that 1 in 8 adults, 13%, said that a relationship with AI can be just as rewarding as a human one. So the majority disagree. Two-thirds of Australians disagreed that a relationship with AI could be just as meaningful. But the generational gap is really significant. More than 1 in 5 Gen Z and millennials, 22% each, agreed and said that AI relationships can be just as rewarding. And as you can see here, much less agreement as you go to the older generations. And those who previously opened up to a chatbot, so when we mirrored or cross-referenced the data showing how people were using AI and the rates, we saw that 1 in 3 of people who've been emotionally vulnerable with a chatbot say AI relationships can match human ones. So they are more likely to feel that there is that form of equivalence or some form of equal value. Only 6% of those who've never been vulnerable with a chatbot agreed. And then lastly, in terms of data from these two studies, I may bring in some other data in a few minutes, but as I'm sure you are and will continue to mull over what AI relationships spell for our future, I think it's important to see what these same respondents that you've been with for the last 20 minutes, what they say themselves in terms of what the future might hold based on what we're seeing with AI relationships. Nearly 2 in 3 Australians have concerns about people becoming too reliant on AI relationships. And what's interesting is that the same populations that we saw are using AI the most in these ways are most likely to hold concerns in some of these cases. So Gen Z, the only generation in this study to have come of age alongside AI, they were the most likely of all the generations to share this concern. I will say baby boomers were also right behind them, but nearly 3 in 4 Gen Z worry about over reliance, perhaps reflecting the fact that they've seen this technology really gain traction during years when social bonds are especially formative. And then those who say that they are often lonely are also more likely to share this concern, which I found really fascinating. So 75% of those who were often lonely said that they were concerned. If you looked at those Australians who were not lonely, it was 10 percentage points lower in terms of expressing this concern. Okay, so you might be thinking, so what? And so I'll just quickly summarize some of the implications and the key data points that we've seen from these two waves. So if I just summarize the biggest points in these studies from what I've learned, they would first of all be that it's still a minority behavior, yes, but a meaningful share of Australians are engaging with chatbots in more personal and emotionally expressive ways, telling chatbots things they've never told anyone else, looking to them for emotional support. And we're seeing in the data how chatbots are functioning as more low friction outlets for this type of personal expression. This shift is most visible, as you've seen, among younger adults, where we see AI use is becoming integrated into how they're navigating and processing personal experiences, at least for a meaningful portion. And this kind of engagement, as we talked about, is delivering perceived benefits for some, with a meaningful minority saying that using chatbots has helped them communicate or connect better with other people. But this all sits alongside early signs of substitution risk. Nearly 1 in 4 Gen Z and over 1 in 5 millennials, as you saw, said that they would sometimes prefer to stay at home and talk to a chatbot rather than go out with friends. And lonely people, more so than non-lonely, are saying this too. Looking at the data across these two waves, almost coming up on a year, I think part of the appeal of AI conversations we're seeing may lie in how these interactions are interpreted by users in contrast to the human ones in their lives. As among younger Australians in particular, a significant portion are seeing AI chatbots as easier to engage with than other people. And over 1 in 5 Gen Z and millennials say that relationships with AI can be just as meaningful as human ones. And then finally, we saw that concern about over-reliance on AI relationships, that it's already widespread, with nearly 2 in 3 Australians feeling uneasy about this idea. While some of this may reflect, this stat in particular, a broader cultural anxiety around emerging technologies that we've seen throughout history, the pattern of concern that we're seeing in the past wave that we've conducted does suggest something more grounded in lived experience, as those closest to these behaviors are the most worried. Nearly 3 in 4 Gen Z, I will remind you, share this concern, as do 76% of Australians who describe themselves as often lonely. And I do think that that is worth remembering. I am not a politician or someone that works in policy, but I think taken together, at least from a research standpoint, these findings highlight the need for ongoing monitoring of these attitudes and behaviors in Australia and beyond. In particular, I think these two waves point to a future that may be less about widespread, deep attachment to AI bots themselves, at least in the near future, and more so about what human bot interactions over time is doing to our own expectations and values surrounding humans' relationships with one another. And I also just want to, as I said, bring in a few data points from outside of Australia, because I think mostly everyone tuning in is not within this country. So just looking at some data that YouGov conducted in the US, my home country, we see that similar trends here to what we've seen in Australia, although please remember that these are different measures. 1 in 5 adults under 30 in the US said that they have had an ongoing personal friendship with an AI chatbot. And we are seeing those similar trends in terms of overall rates, but then broken down by generation in confiding in AI chatbots in more personal ways. And then I also thought it was interesting that one of the stats that YouGov found in the US is that 1 in 10 Americans say that they have hidden how much they use AI from a partner or family member, which I think may be another signal of that growing tension in human relationships that we saw come through for a minority, but a meaningful one in our own study. And then this may be a little hard to see, but it is available online actually. But YouGov, not myself, but some of my colleagues conducted a multi-country study on future expectations around AI intimacy for a client, StarXGen. And that study looked at 6 different countries' attitudes towards AI and relationships. In looking at how people expect AI connections, as you can see with the top chart, so interactions with chatbots to change in people's lives in the next 12 months, YouGov found that looking across these markets, traditional markets like Japan and the UK thought that things would stay quite similar when they think about what the future holds there. But Indonesians, interestingly, expected the most transformation, with nearly 1/3 expecting significant changes in AI-mediated connections in the next year. And then in Western markets, this study found that roughly 2/5 of respondents in the US and Germany predicted minimal change in their romantic lives. And a similar proportion, over 40%, expected AI interactions to remain quite similar to what's occurring now. Taken together, I think with this data in particular, doesn't necessarily suggest people in these nations are more open to AI-mediated connections increasing these stats, but does suggest that those in Indonesia and Hong Kong are more confident it will. But then I thought it was really interesting to look at the next data set. So if you see on the bottom right here, the survey asks, thinking about the next 5 to 10 years, what effect do you believe AI intimacy companions will have on human happiness in each of the following areas? So here we do see more of what these people actually believe about these types of relationships. We found that Asian markets show overwhelming optimism, with more than 3/5, about 61% of respondents in Indonesia and nearly half in Hong Kong, saying that they believe AI intimacy companions will improve human happiness through emotional support. In contrast, we see in Western markets, they're remaining mainly skeptical. In the UK, 2/5 of the population say that AI will worsen emotional health, nearly double the amount who see potential for improvement. And this cautious optimism is mirrored in the US and Germany, where roughly 1/3 of respondents anticipate a negative impact, outnumbering those who believe AI will help reduce loneliness. So, a stark and more consistent in that difference in regionality. All right. That was the presentation and just a glance at what we've seen in Australia over 2 waves of looking at AI relationships and its effect on us, and then a bit of data just to ground us in the global trends at the end. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I think I saw a few fly in, but it is hard for me to actually see the chat. So 1 second.
We do have a couple of questions. Thank you, Brooke. It's so interesting that almost contradiction between those who are most open to this behavior, also the most concerned about over reliance. That was a really, really interesting sort of dilemma.
Yeah, I think that my hunch, of course, more research would be needed to definitively say so, but my hunch is that they understand the allure um, while engaging in it, and I think can see perhaps what that might spell if that is engaged with at large.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Hannah had a question. Hannah, I don't know if you want to put your camera on and ask it yourself.
Hello, hi. I won't put my camera on, but that was fantastic, Brooke. So interesting, and kind of, I guess, confirms what we might all imagine. I guess my one thought, as somebody that leans more quali, is these are really personal feelings, aren't they, that people are sharing? And I wonder, if you've sort of factored in, or, well, you wouldn't have factored in, but, there's probably quite a lot of underclaim here going on, and just wondering what you thought about that.
I think you're probably right. I will say that at least for the YouGov data, the respondents on our panel that, or I guess are a part of our panel, they take these types of surveys consistently, and I think they have built over time that trust with us that their data is anonymous. So I think that probably helps. Perhaps in giving that permission to be honest. But as with all, I think, intimate questions, there is a perhaps even invisible layer of not self-judgment, but perhaps seeing something or saying it in a survey is different than not, even if you're engaging in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a good question and good note. And I would love to do more qual around this.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
mixed methods, and I think this
Yeah.
is one where it really would be helpful. And I also think it's important, even with seeing this data, not to place judgment. I do think qual would help us understand really the color and the layers that
Yeah.
are leading to what we're seeing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Graham, I don't know if you wanted to join in. It's probably not so much a question that you've posted, but more of a
But
comment
I
about.
can phrase it as a question. Thanks, Brooke. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, my point, which is kind of a question, and I'd be interested in your perspective. Again, I come at this as a quali, and therefore inevitably I'm just saying why to myself all the time. And my hypothesis would be that the appeal of chatbots and so on, and that sort of level of sort of personal intimacy with amongst Gen Z is less about the strength of AI and so on, and more about the weakness of the personal relationships they've managed to develop. Ironically enough, probably as a consequence of having grown up with social media and phones. And I wonder if they resort to these online relationships with bots as a consequence of the inadequacies of the suppressed quality of the relationships they've managed to build at an interpersonal level through direct personal face-to-face contact. That would be my hypothesis, admittedly built probably partially on prejudice as a consequence of the generation I'm a part of. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I definitely do. We didn't ask squarely, I guess, about not preparation, but yeah, how they're the social strength of the relationships and network building, which would be super fascinating. But I will say I've seen in other data the impact of COVID on this population, especially Gen Z, in terms of when they went to university, a really meaningful time performing social relationships, but also I think trying out our own ways of interacting with the world and developing those relationships. Many of those didn't happen for them, at least not in person. And then they've entered a workforce where we're working from, I mean, I'm in my own home right now and work from home today. So I think you're right in that, in terms of the institutional perhaps frameworks too, that younger folks have existed or come of age within are very different, and perhaps have led to a dearth or more of a breeding ground for AI relationships to take hold, rather than being that causing starting factor. But again, something I would love to look further into.
If anybody else has any questions, then do drop them in the chat, or feel free to put your camera on and join in. Henrik, actually, I don't think Henrik is here today, but he forwarded a couple of questions. One was about, and again, this kind of generational difference, looking at the online safety amendment that you have in Australia around that bans under 16s from social media platforms. His question is whether you think that has led or could lead to under 16s using AI bots even more, in personal interactions compared with markets that don't have that kind of social media ban. Do you have a perspective on that?
It's a really good question. Unfortunately, my surveys have only, at least for these two waves of AI, have only been with 18 plus. So I don't have the longitudinal data to even be able to see, since I think the first wave was before actually the social media ban was enacted, whether we were seeing some of those younger folks go from the social media platforms to interacting with bots. But it's a really interesting question. So I think something to watch over time.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Mary, I don't know if you wanted to join in.
Hmm.
My video
You're on mute, Mary.
Sorry, I switched my video instead of my microphone on. It's obviously too early in the morning for me. No, I'm just interested in this because I also do counselling for a living as a one day a week, and I think there's this whole thing about this younger generation as well being subjected to massive kind of bullying and social difficulties as a result of social media. And I'm just wondering, and that's from real humans behind it, if you see what I mean. So I'm wondering if that is also sort of driving them to AI chatbots, which might be more friendly to them, which sounds like a kind of contradiction. But I'm just wondering whether that, might be part of it. It's just a speculation, really.
I think you're on the money, actually. One of the measures that we tested in the first wave, and I believe again in the second, so I don't have it in front of me, but it is available on YouGov's website, was a statement that was, I believe it was phrased as, I prefer AI chatbots, or sometimes it's easier to interact with AI chatbots because they don't judge me like humans do. And we did see an over-indexing of people that believed that statement or agreed with that statement, and that interacted with or interacted multiple times with AI in personal ways. So I do definitely think at least some fear of judgment is at play in terms of the fear of human interaction.
Fantastic. Henrik had one other question. I think you've answered it to a degree, but he was looking at the comparing Australia with the US, and I know that the measures for those two markets were not identical, but there were some similarities. And then again, looking at how some of those, certainly the optimism in Asia was quite different from UK, US, and Germany. Henrik's question was whether you can conclude that the markets are similar, the sort of US and Australia are similar in the trend in terms of sharing personal thoughts or feelings, or do you feel like there's enough to make that kind of judgment?
I don't think there's enough to make that conclusively, at least from the research I've overseen, but I do definitely think that there are hints, and from the few data points that we've reviewed today, they are, though keeping in mind the measures were different, they echo each other in what we're seeing and overall level, but also amongst those who are engaging with chatbots in these more personal and social ways. The US and Australian Gen Z and millennials do appear quite similar in their responses. And then with the Asian markets, this was YouGov's, the study that I showed, that was the most recent and largest of YouGov's studies on AI intimacy. And beyond what we've seen here, I have not encountered other, at least YouGov studies that have looked comparing different nations and their openness or not to AI intimacy. But certainly what we saw in the latest YouGov study with those 6 different countries was that the Asian markets did seem more open to the prospect of AI romance and intimacy than the US markets did, at least when looking at the larger proportion of society.
Fantastic. If anybody else has any questions, we have a few minutes left, or if not, we can draw things to a close. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment or raise any points. If not, then there are thanks to you in the chat, Brooke, but I'll also say thank you so much. This has been really interesting. Yeah, really quite fascinating to see some of those areas of similarity, but also difference. It will be, I don't know if you were intending to do this, to keep on doing this, but I think it'll be so interesting to see how things change or stay the same over time.
I would love to. I think it's certainly one of the most fascinating and quickly moving trends to watch as researchers. So thank you so much for having me. And all of the studies that I've shown, that the 2 YouGov waves are available on our site if anyone wants to dig in more.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for today. Thanks to everyone who attended. We'll draw things to a close, but really great. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Have a good evening to you and a good day to everybody else.